4,000 of our young men and women have died and almost 30,000 have been wounded. But there has been another war going on even longer and just as fierce. New threats from the Taliban have made Afghanistan one of the deadliest battlefields in the world.
In these foothills of the Himalayas, violence erupts suddenly, without warning. The 173rd Airborne Brigade Combat Team arrived in northeastern Afghanistan in May 2007. Task Force Sabre was assigned to provide humanitarian assistance to the local villagers and to engage enemies slipping in from Pakistan. Each squad was a tight group of 12, all dependent on one another to survive. Before he arrived in this remote, perilous terrain, Staff Sergeant John Falconberry had already served 2 tours in Iraq. To share Staff Sergeant Falconberry's experiences, Mr. Dennis Leary.
You go to war to serve your country, but when you get there, the most important thing is to get you and your buddies back home alive. There's no choice, no second guessing, no hesitation in what you have to do. All my squad was great, but PFC Chris Pfeiffer was, I'd have to say, one of the best. Chris and I trained together in Germany. Our wives were there too, and we were all buddies. Chris was always willing to pitch in and do his part, and then some. He was just 21, but I relied on him a lot. We'd been in Afghanistan about 3 months when we got a call. 2 platoons were in trouble. There were serious casualties. One guy shot in the face, another hit square in the jaw. When Chris and I and the others arrived, the enemy was pounding our guys with AK-47s, RPGs, machine guns, and firing mortars from every direction. In the middle of the firefight, we loaded up the injured and took them to medevac. When the command post took a direct hit, I climbed up the hill to rescue the commander, but he was already gone. I brought his body down, and then I went back up to retrieve vital maps and equipment. The bullets were still flying. Suddenly, I got hit by machine gun fire, at least 2 or 3 rounds. The blood started gushing out and filled up my pants. It's over, I thought. I just lost my leg. It hurt so much, I thought I was going to die. Then, I saw my buddy Chris. In the middle of the gunshots and mortar explosions, he was bringing a stretcher to me, carrying me out of harm's way. At that awful moment, I'll never forget how he looked after me. "It's all right, Sarge," he said as he loaded me into the chopper. "We'll get you out of here. You're gonna make it." I don't remember much else until I got back to Germany and woke up to see my wife, Sarah.
To share Sarah Falconberry's experiences, Miss Gail O'Grady.
I believe my husband was called to be a warrior, and I was called to be his wife. But it's tough. I'd already had 2 friends bury their husbands. You have to deal with it, but you never get used to it. 3 weeks after John was wounded, I was with him in ICU at Walter Reed when Chris' wife Karen called from the Army Hospital in San Antonio. Chris had been shot by a sniper and was critically wounded. The bullet had struck his kidney, lungs, and spinal cord.
Sharing Karen Pfeiffer's experiences, Miss Caitlin Wax.
At the base in Germany, they didn't want to tell me how badly my husband Chris had been wounded. I was more than 7 months pregnant, and they were afraid I'd go into labor. They tried to keep me off the plane, but there was no way I was going to let him go to the hospital in San Antonio without me.
I felt so helpless. If I'd been there with Chris, maybe I could have prevented it, or at least I could have helped him afterwards. He had been there for me, but how could I help him now? So when Chris took a turn for the worse, I knew I had to send Sarah to San Antonio.
John told me it's more important to help Karen and Chris than to stay with him. So I called his dad to come and babysit him while I was gone. I didn't want to leave John. I didn't want to have to bear that sorrow as well. But Karen and I are battle buddies too. And it was my job to help her with her battle. She would have done the same for me. By this time, Karen was due any day. I stayed in the room with her, and I held Chris's hand at night so she could get some sleep. They say that hearing is one of the last things to go. So I would tell Chris how much his buddy John was thinking about him.
Chris was on dialysis. There was fluid in his lungs, but the worst part was an infection raging through his body. Our last hope was to boost his white cell count with donor transfusion. Sarah was a match for Chris's blood.
They prepared me for a transfusion, and I was giving my blood when he crashed again. It was just too late. It was heart-wrenching, but Chris had been struggling so hard, in so much pain for the past month. Karen told him that he had fought long and hard enough, and it was okay for him to go on to heaven.
I had to let him go. He was taken off life support, and within minutes, he was gone. I kissed him goodbye. Then Sarah took me straight to the OB/GYN doctor to make sure the baby was okay. 2 days later, I was induced so I could go to Chris's funeral. Sarah stayed with me for the entire 18 hours of labor.
Going to Chris's funeral was the first trip I made from the hospital. My leg's still in bad shape, and if the nerves don't grow back, it may have to be amputated. But there was no way I was going to miss that funeral. So many of our buddies came, paying their own way from all over the country. One of the guys even came from Germany. We just had to be there for Chris.
He left for Afghanistan. Chris would kiss my stomach and try to talk to the baby. He was so excited about being a daddy. It's been 8 months since Chris passed away and my daughter Peyton was born, but it doesn't get any easier. The only thing that helps is the guys in Chris's unit have stayed so close to me and Peyton. Chris was so proud he had helped save John's life, and I know he'd be even prouder to know that John and all his buddies have become my family.
It breaks my heart that Chris will never know his daughter. There's nothing I could do but be there for Karen and Peyton and give them the best life they could dream of. Sarah and I have invited Karen to stay with us in San Antonio until she's ready to be on her own. When Chris loaded me onto the medevac, it was the last time I saw him. But now, when I look at Peyton, I see Chris. Chris's spirit will forever be a part of Peyton. Whatever Karen and Peyton need, we'll be there for them.